Hey there, it's Marley. Welcome to my December reading wrap-up. Today, let's talk about the 6 books that I read in December, and we can look at my overall stats for the year of 2023, since it is now the end of the year. So unfortunately, I did not read as much as I wanted to in December. My goal was to read at least 8 books, which was my average for the year, but I only read 6. So we're gonna briefly go through the first 5 because they were all featured in my monthly reading blog where I read some of Indigo's top books of the year. I'll link that vlog below if you want some in-depth thoughts and you want to see a bit of my December. But yeah, the lowest rated book from that video was Meet Me at the Lake by Carley Fortune. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is a romance book. Overall, I felt like it was cute, but it was a little bit too basic for me, and I wanted more from the premise, which is what had initially drawn me in. So in this situation, we're following our main hero and heroine. Our heroine, we see her in 2 points of views, where in one of them, she is a young adult in college living in Toronto in the big city, and she's working at this coffee shop, and she ends up meeting this guy who's an artist that comes in, and they end up spending the whole day together as he kind of shows her around Toronto a little more, shows her some cool spots because he grew up there. And then at the end of the day, they decide to part ways, but they always kind of had this attraction. They agreed that they were going to meet up a year from then, and he never showed. So now in the other timeline, we're seeing her 10 years later. She's been, kind of sad that this guy from her past never showed up, but she's moved on. She's still living in Toronto, running a business, blah, blah, blah. But her mom ends up passing away, and so she has to move back to this lake house that her mom ran, or like this resort that her mom ran more out in the country. So that is not her dream. That was not the plan she had for herself, but she ends up going back there to take over this resort. And when she's there, this guy shows up, the guy from the past. So, 10 years too late, but now they are finally reconnecting, and we're seeing their love story from there. So I thought it was a cute idea of, seeing them in the past and the present, but I feel like in the past chapters, like I kind of wanted more from them. And I also found some of this stuff a little iffy when it comes to like the cheating vibes that were going on, which I feel like as a society, we've really moved past that. And I know a lot of people don't love reading romances where there's cheating involved. So it wasn't like explicit cheating, but like there was a little bit of those vibes going on. I just feel like it's not really a romance that's gonna stick with me. As I said in my vlog, I appreciated a lot of the Toronto references because that's where I lived. But again, I kind of wanted more from that. So a little bit of a lackluster one there. Then I also read Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister, and I gave this one 4 stars. This is a thriller I would recommend. I quite enjoyed it, but it does follow a detective point of view, which I know some people don't love that, but if you do, I think this one is pretty good. As I said, we're following this detective who is taking on this missing girl case, but in the meantime, we're finding out she has a little bit of secrets, a little bit of a dark past, and then someone kind of intercepts her case and is blackmailing her to cover up for this current missing girl case, like to cover up for the true kidnapper or like frame someone. So her morals are being compromised. It's a lot about that, about like what you would do for your kids. Like, would you compromise your own morals to protect them? It deals with a lot of themes like that, but it had some pretty good twists throughout. There was like a major twist at one point that really surprised me. We're seeing multiple different points of view, and so we're trying to piece all the pieces together of this woman's past, the current case. We have some other character points of view. So I did find it quite entertaining to read, and it is a thriller I would overall recommend. Then I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is like a contemporary but kind of thrillery book. It is a satire following this character. I forget her name now. I've heard people talk about this book so much too, but now I'm forgetting her name. But we have the main character, and she is a writer, but she has not found much success. Unlike her friend or her frenemy who has found a lot of success. Her friend ends up dying and she decides to steal the manuscript of her friend and pass it off as her own. The thing that makes that even more problematic is the fact that her friend was Asian and was writing a story about like Chinese history in the war kind of story, and this is now a white woman profiting off of that and pretending that it's her own story even though it was her friend's. So very problematic. And so we're taking a look at her journey through this. Clearly an unlikable main character, but it's making some interesting commentary on the publishing industry, on cancel culture, and like Twitter. I think it was very interesting for anyone who is into publishing, anyone who's really into reading and then the book community. That's why so many people have loved this book this year. I don't really need to promote it. Everyone knows this book, and I agree, it was very good. The beginning took me a little while to get into it because I had just heard so much about it that nothing was really surprising me. It was just fully what I expected from it. And then I got further and then it really picked up for me and was 4 stars. The last 4-star of that vlog, I actually have here. I decided to get the physical copy, or my friend Allie gifted it to me, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, another very, very popular book this year. The book of the year, you could say. So this is a fantasy romance. And as I said, I gave it 4 stars, so I did quite enjoy it. I wish I was someone who could have given it 5 stars. I wish I could be there with all of you. I'm glad I didn't hate it like so many people did, but it was an enjoyable read. It has so many tropes that we have seen and loved before in other fantasies and other dystopians. It is an adult novel, but it does feel very YA just with how accessible it is. It's very easy to read, pretty easy to wrap your head around everything. But we have a main character, Violet, who grew up being a little bit weak, you could say, like not the typical strong person. She has a disability that affects her bones and her muscles or something. So she always thought she was going to grow up to be this scribe. In this fantasy world, there's like a few different paths you can go down. You can be a scribe, you can be a healer, a dragon rider, because they're amidst this war between their country and another country. So she always thought she would be a scribe just because of how she was, but her mother forces her to go be a dragon rider. So it was giving very much Divergent of Triss going into Dauntless. It was like the same situation. She's like having to do these really difficult tasks, prove herself and her strength. Her fellow like peers and students are trying to kill her. She gets this romance with a tough older guy. It's such a similar dynamic to like Foreign Triss. I can't help but compare it. There's also tropes that I think are taken from ACOTAR. So if you like any of those types of books, I think you would like this. I really appreciated the dragon stuff because I don't read that many books with dragons, so that was something a little different. I did quite like the romance in the first half. Unfortunately, I didn't love the romance in the second half. Once the characters really got together, it just loses all interest for me. So I'm definitely nervous about the second book. I did buy it so I can read it, but I'm a little nervous. So if you've read Iron Flame, that's what I want to hear about in the comments. Like, how did it compare to this? Because this was very enjoyable. I just wish I enjoyed it a little bit more, like everyone else giving it 5 stars. Then we have a 4.5, and that is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a mystery kind of thriller, a little bit of a cozy mystery. It was very, very funny. We have our main character, Ernest, and he is a man in this family who every one of his family members seems to have killed someone. And he's telling us the background and the story of each of them and how they killed someone throughout the book. In between those chapters of finding out the history of his family, we also have a current situation going on where his family all got together at this ski resort setting. Then murders start happening at the ski resort. So it's like a classic whodunit situation, snowed in, but with a very much more comedic, meta kind of narration. Our main character is speaking to us the entire time. He's very like self-aware and cracking jokes about the murder mystery genre. So I thought that was very fun and unique, and any murder mystery lover would enjoy this. And I know there's a second book for this as well, which I look forward to reading. The only book finally, that was not featured in the Indigo vlog. It was Just Like Magic by Sarah Hogle. This was the only Christmas romance book I read this year, and I also gave this 4.5 stars. Very happy to report that. I gave another one of Sarah Hogle's books 4.5 stars and another one 4 stars. So she definitely is one of my favorite authors. Her books are just so funny and silly. So if that's something you're into, you should pick her books up. If you don't like really over the top stuff, I don't think you would like it. Especially this one is like so over the top because it is like Christmassy as well. Peach, it's okay. It's okay. We have our main character, I think her name's Betty, and she is very much like a Scrooge kind of character at the beginning. She comes from this family that's very dysfunctional and also is full of like famous people. Like her grandma was a famous actress, her sister is like an actor, influencer, her brother's an actor, she was an influencer, and her business has like crashed. She has a really bad reputation now because of an ex-boyfriend. So she is just not a happy camper, and she's someone who like kind of takes out her unhappiness on others. Like she's pretty grumpy, just not having the Christmas spirit. And then the situation happens where she's like drunk and spills alcohol on this record that's playing All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey. Like something happens and it conjures the holiday spirit, aka Hall. This man who is the holiday spirit visits her and is like, I'm gonna fix you, basically. Like I'm going to give you holiday spirit. So really random, but yeah, he just helps her have a better Christmas. He is able to use magic and grant wishes, and along the way she learns a lot of lessons from him and gets a lot happier, and he learns a lot from her about being human. It's a little bit of a fish out of water situation with him. So very fun tropes are here. The grumpy sunshine, fish out of water. There's also a lot of stuff with her family as well. It was just such a cute Christmas rom-com, especially as someone who doesn't typically like them. I normally find them so basic, but this one really stood out to me. And something about Sarah Hogle's humor just really hits for me, and I see why it wouldn't work for everyone, but it does work for me. So this is a romance I would recommend putting on your TBR. Peach, you better not knock over that tree. So those are all the books I read in the month. Now, I thought we could go look at my end of the year stats now that the year is done. So first we could look at the stats that I was keeping track of myself on this spreadsheet. So I ended up ending the year having read 101 books. My goal was to read 100, so I did reach that. So I'm happy about it overall. I'll be honest, I do wish I had read a little bit more and surpassed my goal a little bit more. This is probably the least I've read in the last couple years, but I still hit 100, so I am happy with that. Books acquired, 38. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like that's not that much compared to some people. I have definitely been reading a lot of library books on my e-reader, so maybe that's not too bad. Hours listened, I did listen to a couple audiobooks, so 7.5, and then pages read about 37,613. I have this graph of like books read per month, so as you can see, I am a pretty consistent reader, a pretty consistent routine kind of person. So the graph isn't too crazy, except at the end there, my best reading month was November, and then you can see I dropped off a little bit in December and had my worst reading month this month. For format, 64% of the books I read were physical, and then 33 were ebook, and only 2% were audiobook, which I think is great. The fact that physical is the majority of those books, and most of those were, you know, off my TBR cart, that was great. And that was one of my goals for the year, was to read more of my physical books. So that's great. For audience, 53% of the books I read were adult, 42% were YA, and then only 2% were middle grade. So that makes sense to me. I really try to read a lot of adult and YA. That's just what I'm interested in. So makes sense. For own voices, unfortunately, only 25% of the books I read were own voices. So I feel like going into the next year, that's definitely something I would like to work on, is kind of diversifying my reading and reading from more own voices authors. Okay, as for genre, my most read genre was fantasy with 32%, and then thriller with 27%. So those were my top two, which makes sense. Those are my two faves. Going into next year, I maybe want to read more more thriller books. I know thriller and fantasy were pretty close, but I feel like I generally enjoy thriller a little bit more than fantasy. So I would like to read more thrillers next year. Then we have romance with 15%, contemporary with 9.9, mystery with 7.9, only 1% sci-fi. I feel like that could go up. Horror at 4%. I wouldn't mind seeing that go up. And then historical at 1%. That doesn't need to go up. As for my ratings, it seems like I mostly rate things 4 stars with 33%. Then we have 3.5 with quite a few there. Then 4.5, then 5 and 3. And luckily my low ratings are very small. So we do love to see that. For author gender, which I just started tracking this year, 82% of the authors I read were female, which really does not surprise me at all. Male 16% and non-binary at only 1%. For author status, which again is a new thing I've been tracking, about 70% of the authors I read from were repeat authors, and then 30% were new to me. And I don't know how I feel about this, like what my goal is with this. Like, do I want to read from more new authors, or is it good to keep reading from the same? I don't know. I just wanted to track it and see what it showed. And then we have year published. Makes sense. Most of the books I read this year were new releases, and I'm actually glad to see that. It's nice to know I'm keeping up with the new releases and like what's trending. 29 of the books I read this year were from 2023, 18 from 2022, and 15 from 2021. And the rest just sort of start pittering out, going all the way back to 1872. So we were reading a few throwback books there. Then if we look at my books acquired, how much I spent on them list, I think this is the first year I've tracked this as well. Apparently I spent around $414 on books. Let me know in the comments if you think that's like a lot or not. I feel like it's not a lot. I feel like what I was saying before, like I am getting a lot of books from the library, so that could be like a lot worse, I feel. And then the percent of them that I read was 74%, which I think is a really, really good stat. It showed I'm actually buying them and then reading them within the year. So that's actually great. Then I saw that Storygraph did a little 2023 reading wrap up for me, so we can see if there's anything interesting over here. First book I read this year was Legendary by Stephanie Garber, and the last book was Just Like Magic. Apparently the average length of the books I read is 369, which I feel like is pretty good. Like that's not too long, not too short. And then it took me around 4 days to finish each book. So it's interesting that Storygraph told me that, because that's kind of how I plan out my reading, is that I kind of budget for about 4 days per book. So clearly I am right about that. The least amount of time spent reading a book was 1 day, and that was Killjoy by Holly Jackson. Makes sense, that book is like 100 pages and took me no time. The book that took me the most was apparently Us Against You by Frederick Bachman. I think this was a book I put down and then came back to later, so that's why it took me the longest. The authors I spent the most time with were Maggie Stiefvater, which makes sense because I read The Raven Boys, but I also read another book by her, so that was 5 total as my most read author. Then we have Holly Black at 4 books, which makes sense because I read the Cruel Prince series, and then Lisa Jewell with 4 books, which she doesn't have any series, but she is one of my favorite thriller authors who I do try to read her backlist books, so I guess I read 4 of her books. My average star rating was 3.89, which I think is not too bad. Oh, some months were better than others. So my highest average rating month was July with 4.25. It doesn't say my worst month. And then the most pages was November, which I knew was my best reading month. Another interesting stat is that 50 of the books I read this year were part of a series. So that's half the books I read were part of a series, which is interesting. I feel like it kind of makes sense because I read so much fantasy this year, and normally fantasy are series. And I think that's kind of promising towards me like getting further into series and finishing them, because there are still a few series I'm in the middle of that I really need to get to. But I feel like the fact that half the books I read were part of series is kind of good. And I finished all the books I picked up this year, no DNFs. Again, not surprising. I do not DNF, and I know everyone does and says how it's so good to DNF, you know, if you're not enjoying a book, but I just don't do it. I rarely do it. I think it's because I'm so like choosy with the books I pick to read. I'm picking books that I think I'm gonna like. So I don't know. Okay, I think that is going to be all for the stats today. Definitely leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought of my wrap up or of my stats, or let me know any interesting stat from your records this year. And thank you so much for watching all of my videos throughout 2023. I hope if you're not subscribed already, you will subscribe today. I will see you in my next video. Bye.